In 2023, Shelby Nealy pleaded guilty on all counts of first-degree murder for the killing of his in-laws, Richard, Laura, and Nicolas Ivansic. The murders took place in the state of Florida on the 14th and the 16th of December 2018, respectively. He had also pled guilty to a manslaughter charge in the state of Ohio for the killing of his wife, Jamie Ivansic, and also his 3 dogs. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison for the killing of the wife and 5 years in prison for the killing of the dogs. After killing the in-laws, he had fled back to Ohio with his 2 children, where he was tracked down by the police and arrested. He previously pled not guilty when he was charged on February 2019 after he was extradited back to Florida. His defense team tried to strike a deal to plead guilty to all counts and serve 4 consecutive life sentences, but this was denied, and now we are here in the sentencing phase where the jury gets to decide whether he will spend the rest of his life in prison without parole or deserving of the death penalty. It took the jury just 4 hours to decide that he does deserve the death penalty, and on this video we shall be going through the key testimonies for the defense and the prosecution. We shall also be going through the performance of both the prosecution and the defense in presenting their evidence to the jury, and also conclude with reasons why it's actually not that surprising that the jury reached its verdict. So without further, let's catch up with the Shelby Nealy sentencing trial.
He tried to make it to where they didn't see it coming and they didn't feel any pain.
Assistant State Attorney Brian Sarabia presented the prosecution's theory of the case in their opening statement, and that was that Shelby had traveled from Texas after he had successfully killed his wife, Jamie Ivansic, and this was to finish the job and cover up her death when the family had inquired. They presented Shelby as cold and calculated, highlighting that he had killed Richard and his wife Laura first. The prosecution presented Shelby as cold and calculated, highlighting that he had killed Richard and his wife Laura. He had successfully hid their bodies in carpet after the killings. They highlighted that Shelby was cruel and he had spent time with Nick after killing Richard and Laura in the same house and were watching a movie, having pizza together, and then he had proceeded to kill Nick. They highlighted that Shelby had spent a great deal of time with Nicolas Ivansic in the same house after he had killed Richard and Laura Ivansic. They were watching a movie together and having pizza. Then in the early morning of 16th of December, Shelby kills Nick with the same weapon that he was used in the killing of Laura and Richard days prior. The prosecution theorized that Shelby was using the phones of the deceased to communicate as if they were alive. This was a pattern that he continued in after he had killed and buried his wife, Jamie Ivansic, in February 2018. He tried to dig a hole in the yard to bury the bodies of Nicolas, Richard, and Laura Ivansic. Prosecution asserts that these victims were only found after a welfare check was done and Shelby was nowhere to be found. The prosecution raised that they would prove 4 aggravators, which was killing 3 individuals to avoid arrest, that it was cold, calculated, and premeditated, and it was heinous and cruel. The jury only has to find them guilty of 1 of these aggravators. The defense presented their statements on day 5 after the state rested and highlighted that the jury are not to impose the death sentence due to Shelby Nealy pleading guilty to all the counts and confessing to these murders. They sympathized that the jury had a massive job on their hands and it's not easy, but pleading the death penalty here isn't appropriate for the case, and highlighted that Shelby had a toxic relationship and is toxic with women, but it doesn't add up as to why someone without prior violence would do something like this. They brought up Jamie's violence against him and argued these are mitigating factors to the aggravators, and for the jury to consider mercy and send Shelby to life in prison instead. So with the theory of the case established, we shall now be going on to the presentation of evidence by both the prosecution and the defense. And we shall be starting with the prosecution and looking at their key witnesses.
He tried to make it to where they didn't see it coming and they didn't feel any pain.
Before we go into the key witnesses that I believe helped the prosecution prove the aggravators, let's look at the foundational and technical witnesses really quickly to help provide an idea of what happened. We heard from James Onlin, who was assisting in the investigation and helped compile the photo packs from the scene to the agency. We heard from Deborah Fenton, who testifies to seeing a young man, likely of Shelby Nealy's stature, digging a trench in the neighborhood, and that was about 3 to 4 feet deep, and said that she told her friend in Wisconsin about it, that a man was digging what looked like a grave. We also heard from Donna Goodsey, who is part of the neighborhood, and also testified to seeing a man also dig a trench in the neighborhood, and said that it was pretty deep. We heard from Rich John, who is the son of Richard Ivansic, and he did give an impact statement. We're not going to go through that, but he was the one that placed the welfare check call to the police on the 1st of January 2019, and this was because he had not heard from either Laura, Nick, or Richard Ivansic. We heard testimony from Eva Temple, who was a forensic specialist on day 2, who testified to smelling a strong odor when she had entered the house and saw a buildup of bugs at the residence. A number of photos she took was handed to the jury. We heard testimony from Rhonda Klein, an assistant supervisor in the Forensic Sciences Division, who testified to processing the scene on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of January 2019, and showed photos of the hammer that was found under the bed in the master bedroom, and finding a rake and a shovel. We heard testimony from Ashley Luff of the Forensic Sciences Division, who showed more photos from the scene and receipts from a pharmacy that was found in the house, which showed purchases on the 14th of December 2018, during the day before Richard and Laura were killed. This showed the premeditation and planning that Shelby had done. We heard from Dana Suketo from the Forensic Sciences Division, who mainly testified regarding materials collected from the scene for further testing. We heard from William Garrett, who is a latent print examiner, who testified to Shelby Nealy's fingerprints at the scene lifted from room H, C, and E, likely the bathroom, living room, and master bedroom, but this wasn't disclaimed in court. We also heard from Detective Laura Scapati, who testified to primarily being responsible for documenting the scene. She also testified that Shelby Nealy was cooperative with the investigation when the defense raised it on cross-examination, but on redirect, she testified that they had to use a lot of resources to track down Shelby. This gives the idea that it wasn't just a voluntary handover. We heard from Renee Split, the daughter of Richard Ivansic, who testified that Shelby had told her that him and Jamie Ivansic were coming down to see them on the 14th of December 2018. She also gave a victim impact statement, but we're not going to go into that. We heard from Caitlin Fair, the DNA analyst, who testified to conducting buccal swab tests on the different parts of the hammer, which was the claw, side, grip, and the black handle. The major contributor of the DNA mixture was Nicolas Ivansic. This testimony suggested that Shelby may have been wearing gloves when he carried out this attack, because if he had cleaned it, you would not find a DNA mixture of Nicolas Ivansic. Now let's move on to the key witnesses that I believed aided the prosecution in the presentation of a successful death penalty case. We heard from Officer Robert Rondos on day 2, who was the officer to respond to the welfare check that was placed by Rich Gunn. He testified that there was a rake and shovel at the front door and had gained access as the porch door was left open. It was still treated as a welfare check despite this. He testifies that there was an odor in the house, that the house was a mess, ransacked, it was dirty, diapers everywhere, and there was stale food at the house. He testified that there was blood on the couch, enough to be noticed. He also said that he saw fluid coming out of a room which he inspected, and there were cleaning products in that room. He testifies to seeing another deceased person on the floor in the room, wrapped in a floor cloth, and there was obvious head trauma. He says that latex paint was poured on the deceased's face, and there was paint on the wall as if someone had thrown it onto the wall. He testifies to seeing another deceased person on the floor within the doorway. He testifies that there was a deceased person in the bathroom with similar head trauma to the other decedent and was covered up in paint, and says in these rooms there were signs that there was an attempt to cover up due to the paint, but he cannot be 100% sure. This testimony really aided the state case in regards to it being premeditation, due to the fact that the paint was being used on the decedents to cover up their faces. You can also say that it helped with the cruelty as well, because of the similar head trauma being found with each of the decedents, showing that it was abject cruelty. You can also say that the place being trashed, etc., could add to the cruelty, but I believe that this might be a minor impact. We heard testimony from Christy Klotz, who works for the Forensic Sciences Division, and she testified to seeing receipts on the pizza box dated 14th of December 2018 at 4:55 and 18th of December 2018 at 12:14 p.m. She also testifies to finding a McDonald's receipt dated 18th of December 2018 at 11:36 a.m. These receipts show premeditation as well as a cruelty and heinous to them, because it shows that he may have gotten food with Richard before he had killed him. But on the 18th, it seems to me that he had already killed all these 3 people off and was just living there and eating food, having no care in the world. It could also suggest that Nick was having these foods on the 14th when he met them. We really don't know, but definitely there's a premeditation element here, that he was using these as a way to worm up to the Ivansics and pretend as if nothing had happened. We heard testimony from Christopher Lemon, who was the investigator on the case, and he testified to inspecting the vehicle that belonged to Jamie Ivansic, and says that the Kia Sorento that belonged to Laura Ivansic was not at the scene. This gives the idea that Shelby may have traveled to Ohio with this vehicle, and this was very key for premeditation because it shows that Shelby was fleeing the scene. We heard testimony from Dr. Susan Ignacio, an associate medical examiner, through deposition. She testifies to being at the scene and seeing these bodies. She says that the bodies were found in the bedroom, master bedroom, and the master bathroom connected to the master bedroom. She testified that she didn't conduct the autopsy at the scene. She testifies that the heads of the bodies found were covered in paint, and the body found in the master bedroom was Richard. He had crushing injuries to his chest caused by a hammer after 2 blows were delivered, and there were no other injuries to any other part of his body. She testifies that Richard had 2 lacerations on the back of his head and also his forehead as well. She says that lacerations means tears to the skin. He had fractures to his nose, right cheekbone, and the base of his skull. This suggests that his face was hit, the back of his head was also hit, and his chest was also hit. This means that he was likely getting defensive with Shelby, and Shelby was doing all he can to kill him. She testifies that the lacerations and other injuries on Richard could have been caused by a hammer based on the fractures. She testifies that Laura had 5 lacerations in the back of her head and fractures to the base of her skull, and says the cause of death was blunt head trauma and it was deemed a homicide. She testifies that Nick was morally decomposed and covered in paint. She also says that the lacerations were on the right side of his head, and says that these lacerations caused defects. She says the defects were holes in the skull and had multiple fractures around the area of the lacerations. She testifies that she did examinations of Jamie Ivansic, and she had about 4 or 5 lacerations to the left side of her head and had fractures on the base of her skull. She says that blunt head trauma was the cause of her death, and it was determined as an homicide. She says the injuries were caused by a hammer and had a total of 12 blows to the head. This testimony was really key in proving the state's theory of the case in regards to premeditation as well as abject cruelty, because it showed that he used the same exact method that was used on Jamie Ivansic on these in-laws. No difference whatsoever. Similar amount of blows being administered to these people, and it must have been pure cruelty to have traveled to see these relatives from February until December. We heard testimony from Sergeant Joseph Schlott, who testified to digging around 5 foot deep at Shelby and Jamie's residence in Ohio, finding a body in a garbage bag. fully clothed and in a fetal position. He says that he saw several holes in the skull and the shape of the head was no longer a proper head anymore. This was said to be Jamie Ivansic's body. He testified that the home had been remodeled when they went to look at the residence where Jamie was found. This really aids the prosecution in their theory of the case for premeditation because he has successfully hidden his tracks and no one has suspected, at least in Ohio, that he had killed Jamie Ivansic. We heard testimony from Sergeant Derek Anderson, and his testimony was probably the longest of them all, but he was the one that brought together the whole investigation prepared for this capital murder case, including the video confession by Shelby Nealy. It testifies to what we already know about the house where the Ivansic was found. It was a complete mess. A tarp was even found in the living room. Eggs and paint were on the walls and paint over the victim's face, etc. He testifies that Laura Ivansic had been to Walgreens on the 14th of December 2018 doing grocery shopping. I think this was presented in the CCTV form. Texts were read out of Shelby pretending to be Jamie on the 29th of December 2018 after all the killings.
And the next message in the stream is what day?
Saturday, December 29th at 3:15 a.m.
So now I'm flipping, it has number 9 on the bottom of the page. What is that message say?
And this is from Laura's phone. It says, "I'm so sorry, I just got this. My phone has been acting really weird. I can't even call or hear on the phone, but no, we are going to be in Texas for a while with Jamie. We are currently dealing with a family emergency with her. We love you. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year."
And what was the next message in the stream?
December 29th, 6:33 a.m. Barb replies, "Prayers for Jamie. Take care. Love, Jim and Barb."
And does that message continue?
It does.
And how does it continue?
However, if possible, call Luann or text her. She was in the process of contacting the police to look for you between you and me. We are in the process of talking to the police and trying to find Shelby. His vehicle was found abandoned on the side of the road. We know everybody is worried, but we have a lot going on.
And who was that from?
That's from Laura's phone.
And were these text messages with Laura?
Catherine Lawrence.
Catherine Lawrence?
Yes, Catherine Lawrence, her niece.
Okay, and this first message, when was it?
This is December 29th at 3:11 a.m.
And was this from Laura's phone?
It was.
And what does this message say?
"I'm sorry, I just got this. My phone has been acting really weird. I can't even call or hear anything on the phone. Is everything okay?"
And was there a response?
There was, from Laura's phone. "If I get time, I will. I'm currently dealing with a family emergency with Jamie in Texas."
Texts were read regarding communications with his friends and parents, also a girlfriend by the name of Summer Coates, where he was flirting, and who all of these people were based in Ohio. And he said on these texts that he was planning to move to Ohio. Shelby's confession was played where he does admit that he was a monster for all of these killings, and he said that he had killed Jamie as she was threatening to kill him and also threatening to kill his kids as well, and says that he was always living under her control and that she had bipolar and was suffering from psychosis.
Did you ever call the police on her? The police were called on her multiple times in Newport Richie? Or where? In just in Florida and Ohio, man. But I was just under her control, man. I know I come across as the evil one, and quite honestly, I am. I'm a monster for the shit I did. But unfortunately, there's a reason for the shit that I did. She would go in jail. Her parents would lie for her. She would come out. She would go into the psych ward. Her parents would lie for her. She would come out. I would lie for her because I was under her control.
Now, when you say she was like the psychosis that you described, was she seeing a doctor or a psychologist?
She refused to.
Refused to? Was she on any meds?
She refused to be on any meds. Every day my kids saw a woman beating under them, and I just didn't want that life for them.
In the confession also, Shelby says that he had only choked Jamie. This was completely false because we know the extent of Jamie's injuries by now. Shelby also detailed why he committed his murders on Richard, Laura, and Nick Ivansic, as he believed that these guys would have been bad parents for his children, and he was just trying to protect his children.
December 15th and December 16th.
December 15th and December 16th is when you killed them?
Yes.
Okay, do you remember? Okay.
Parents, go ahead.
No, I don't want to stop you. Go ahead. Said the parents.
The parents passed away first, and then I dragged their bodies into their room, cleaned it up, waited for Nick to get home, spent one last night with Nick, and then when he went to bed, I killed him too. I basically tried to make it to where they didn't see it coming and they didn't feel any pain. That was my concern.
Close the doors. You said yourself your kids can't open the doors.
Yeah.
My biggest fear is, if I'm you, is, holy shit, I don't want my kids opening the doors and seeing dead people.
Yeah, I know. That's why I made sure that they covered it up. Yeah. Trust me, my kids are my number one priority.
I believe you wholeheartedly. For someone to do something of this extent to protect their kids, I'm not saying it's right. And I know you know it's not right? You know right from wrong, right? You know what you did was wrong. But at the time, I think maybe you thought you didn't have any other options, right?
Exactly.
You were pretty much out of gas, right? Out of options.
Shelby also confesses to digging the trench a week after the murders and said he stayed in the house that week with the kids. He also said he had incensed the house to mask the stench. Shelby said that he didn't commit all these murders because he was evil and just went on a rampage, but rather it was due to his wife being abusive and suffering mentally. The lead investigator testifies that Shelby had told him that he had only strangled Jamie Ivansic, then later said that he had hit her one time with a hammer and he was a victim of domestic violence.
Okay, and I remember the big detail that I forgot about yesterday. I do apologize. After that happened, I did grab a hammer and I hit her just to make sure that she was dead.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I forgot about that.
That's fine.
It just came to me because, like I said, I blocked that.
And when you hit her, that was still in the living room with the hammer?
Yes.
Where did you retrieve the hammer from?
We had a hammer in our house.
How many times do you think you're struck with the hammer?
I was struck her once.
One time?
Yes.
Where?
That. Like in front of that.
So basically the same as with ours?
Yes.
Okay.
On the confession video, it says that he wants his children to have a happy ending and have a good life and is content with whatever punishment that comes his way. On the video, Shelby also confessed to his mom about the killings and says that she needs to take care of the kids and he knows what he did and he is just a horrible person. On this video, Shelby says that there was domestic violence from Jamie Ivansic on her parents in September 2017. On cross-examination, the defense highlighted that Shelby was trying to take his kids from the Ivansic as they were horrible parents. This was to try and argue that it wasn't just cruel, but on redirect, the state highlighted that it wasn't voluntary behavior, and the detective certified that Shelby had to be located before he could admit to committing these crimes. He also said that Shelby had told him that the domestic violence in the relationship was both ways. This was a really good witness for a number of reasons. It went to prove that Shelby's actions were completely heinous because of the fact that he stayed at the house for a whole week with his children and had lit up incense to try and mask up the smell. Not only that, it also showed that even in him trying to come forward to say, yeah, I did all these things and confess and made all these confessions, he was still lying and he was still providing incomplete information. This gives the idea that he's likely feigning all of this to try and get off the death row, that he knew what was coming and he was just trying to get off the death row by thinking, if I confess to everything, then everything will be fine. But that lie was really beneficial for the prosecution meeting their aggravators. Now let's move on to the defense case in chief.
We tried to make it to where they didn't see it coming and they didn't feel any pain.
Before we go to the key witnesses that I felt helped the defense mitigate these aggravators, let's look at the foundational and technical witnesses that I felt helped laid a bit of information about the case that they are presenting. We heard from Lisa Trooper, who was the former employer of Shelby, who testified to witnessing bruising and marks on Shelby, and says that it was reported to her by management that Shelby had called in saying that he was going to take his life because his wife was abusing him. We also heard from Paul M. Trooper, who was the former employer of Shelby, who testified that Shelby was not rehired for a job due to all of the drama that his life had brought to the place. We heard from Cheryl Papura, a former employer of Shelby, who testifies to seeing scratches on his neck and bruises on his arms when he showed up for work. We heard from Grace Anna, who was a consultant for Floridians for alternatives to the death penalty, who testified to helping create records and manuscripts in the case and helping Shelby write the book he had released during the time he was incarcerated. We heard from Deputy Scott Thomas, who responded to one of the DV incidents between Shelby and Jamie on the 3rd of January 2016, and said that Richard Ivansic and Shelby were at the scene and saw injuries on Jamie's wrist. He said that Shelby told him that a cat had caused all these injuries, but on redirect, he said that she was taken to hospital because she was viewed as a threat to herself. We heard testimony from Detective Scott Sistek, who testified to responding to a call on the 27th of April 2016 about a female threatening a baby, and says the baby was in the car when he arrived. He says there was no physical injuries to her, and the male had bruises on his neck and was pepper sprayed. She was also taken to a psychiatric hospital after this. We heard testimony from Sergeant Del Morris, who testified to responding to a call on the 28th of August 2016, and says that he heard yelling when he arrived at the house, and when he got closer he saw Shelby on his back and Jamie on top of him. Shelby was holding on to her wrist, telling her to calm down. On cross-examination, he agrees that Jamie had disclosed to him an abuse where she was beaten violently by Shelby months prior and had twisted her arms whilst driving, causing the car to spin out of control. He also agrees that she reported she was going to leave him, and he got upset, grabbed her, and began choking her. So she fought back against him, causing scratch injuries. On redirect, he testifies that Jamie was 10 weeks pregnant and was told by Shelby that she was not taking her bipolar medication, and had told him she was choking him and attacking him, resulting with a black eye. And he had charged Jamie with domestic violence. He also says that Shelby didn't want to fill in a statement to aid the charge. Tammy Fox, who was a retired officer, testified to being called out on the 21st of December 2015 for an incident, and she said that Jamie was completely out of control and was sitting on the floor at the scene. Shelby had reported to her that she hadn't taken her medication and was going to stab her belly and kill her child. She was also Baker acted on this occasion, which means she was placed in a psychiatric hold, and she also testified to seeing an actual cut on Jamie's belly. Phil Adams, who is a patrolman, testified to receiving a call on October 2016 about a male needing psychological help and having an episode, and Jamie saying not to take him to hospital as he would get in trouble. He says he charged both Jamie and Shelby with domestic violence after she had told him that he choked her, threw her against the wall, and bit her left shoulder. He said he saw bite marks on her as well. Scott Zimmerman also provided testimony about being on the scene with Phil Adams on the 5th of October 2016, saying that Shelby had told him that he didn't want to get his wife in trouble, that it was only a verbal altercation, and she had hit him with a pan in the head, scratched him, and bit him on the arm. Vincent Del Santa testified that Shelby came into work with a black eye, and he said it was caused by Jamie. He said that management had told him that Jamie called threatening to kill Shelby. He says Shelby asked him to watch his kids due to his wife being arrested for domestic violence, and he says that the kids just looked dirty, and he even had to change one of the kids' diapers when he was looking after them. Michelle Justice, a former co-worker at Target, testified to Jamie coming into work with bruises and scratchings regularly, to a point where she asked him why he had all of these injuries, and he would say that his wife had been abusing him, that she was pregnant, and not taking her meds. All these witnesses were to show the violence that Shelby had experienced with Jamie, and also the different psychiatric holds he was in. Though I don't think these are very key witnesses, it was enough to lay the foundation that he could have just snapped one day. Now let's move on to the key witnesses that I felt were good for the defense theory of the case, where they were asserting that this character was out of the blue for Shelby. We heard from Dr. Holmes, a clinical forensic psychologist who testified to being on the case in 2023, saying that Shelby had suffered from depression and had previous suicide attempts. She says that the father had committed suicide and his father had abused his mother, and when he done this when he was a little child. She testified that the mother and stepdad noticed he was quite different when he was around the age of 15, and that Shelby had disclosed to her that he had been sexually abused by his stepmother at the age of 15. He testified that Jamie had suffered from bipolar and had lacerations on her stomach, which she determined to be self-inflicted during the time she was pregnant. She testifies that despite Shelby being advised to leave the DV relationship by numerous people, that he said he was afraid to leave due to not believing he will get custody of his kids due to a previous domestic violence conviction from his previous relationship, and she would also threaten the kid. She testifies that Shelby is unable to handle strong emotions and find it hard to handle emotions in general, and says that he likely has PTSD due to several hospitalizations compounded with the father's suicide. On cross-examination, the state highlights that he had a lack of ability to follow the rules with the parents who still cared for him, and she says that that's just likely due to him being a teenager. They also highlighted that he had violent instances with the ex, and she says that doesn't surprise her because he just can't control his emotion. On redirect, the defense highlights Shelby's neurology, and Dr. Heather says, yeah, something is neurologically wrong with Shelby, and it would make it difficult for him to feel emotions, and that's why she had recommended a neurological ideology. This was, in my opinion, a good testimony overall because it presents the idea that something is wrong with him, and he's just maybe you can call it a psychopath, and he's just something off in his head that needs further examination. That being said, the testimony that she gave regarding having a previous DV conviction was never mentioned by the state. I don't think they could have even entered into that realm because it would have been too prejudicial, but he came in through this witness, and I felt that bell could be unrung, and the jury could have heard that and just decided that this man is not worth saving. Irrespective if they all thought, let's show mercy on him. This previous DV conviction was a mistake of a testimony to be given, even though I know why it was given, because it paints Shelby as being trapped in this relationship, and he probably was trapped. Who knows? Being in that situation is very triggering. Yes, being in a domestic violence situation is usually high risk, but to hear that he had a previous DV conviction, I don't think is very good for the defense. Dr. James Campbell, a clinical psychologist, was up next. He testifies to discussing with Shelby about relationship issues and the fact that he never felt as valued in a relationship as he felt with Jamie. He testifies to discussing with Shelby about the relationship issues with mother and father and how that trauma had impacted him as a child. On cross-examination, he testifies that the anxiety and fear that Shelby had felt was the fear of being caught by the police.
It's kind of funny to be talking about a defendant who is exhibiting indications of post-traumatic stress disorder because he beat his first wife and because he killed his second wife, isn't it?
Well, I guess if you're going to say it that way, then yes, it is.
Okay.
And the state also asked the question whether it will be sexual abuse that Shelby had started a relationship with Jamie when she was 17, and he said it will go down to the minutiae of the law, but he does regard this as abuse. On redirect, the defense tried to present scenarios to try and justify the relationship with a 17-year-old, and he also testified that psychologically there is something wrong with someone if they have been sexually abused by someone that's older. On some level, I do think that this witness was really good for the defense in helping with the theory of the case and showing that his childhood, Shelby's childhood, was catching up with him as he was growing up, and it was affecting his relationships. Yeah, that was all good, but in my opinion, the juice just wasn't worth the squeeze here, because we got to hear testimony that I never thought we would hear in this case, that Shelby was only 17 when they had met. No testimony was given for that, and I really believe that this might prejudice the jury a lot, because they're gonna have strong feelings about a grown man dating someone that young. So I don't think that this testimony was overall good for the defense, but I saw what they were trying to go for. Robert Ouaou, I don't know how to pronounce his name properly, but he was a clinical psychologist specializing in neuropsychology, and he gave testimony in regards to Shelby's neurology. He testifies to conducting a regular standardized test for his normal work to see if someone is abnormal or not. He testifies that Shelby has sustained injuries to his head from 2012, and he was only 19 years of age when he had these injuries with his first wife. He testifies that the head injury showed brain bleeds and he lost consciousness. He testifies to conducting a battery of neuropsychological tests on Shelby. This was to see the performance between Shelby and the national average in regards to intelligence. He testifies that Shelby had passed all of these exams. He went through the IQ testing that was conducted and says that Shelby was on the 12th percentile for non-verbal IQ, and says that it was abnormal to score this low compared to his 105 verbal IQ score. He says that based on this course, there is a likelihood of an impairment related to Alzheimer's or stroke, and he falls into the 4% of the population with this split IQ. On cross-examination, the state highlights that Shelby had strangled his first wife before his first head injury and killed his next wife after the head injury. And Robert said that this just didn't surprise him. And the state also highlights his behavior doesn't seem to change despite the head injury, and Robert said that he was only evaluating the head injury. On redirect exam, he testified that the split was an indication of potential brain damage, and standardized testing was just objective and he doesn't require to look at all other reports. I really thought that this was the best witness that they could put on for their case, because even though it wasn't as definitive to say, yeah, Shelby does have a brain damage and this is the brain damage, but I felt like the potential of brain damage could explain why he was acting the way he did after he had killed Richard, Nicolas and Laura. I felt like this testing could have gone to the jury to try and explain that, could have gone to explain that even with the hospitalizations and also with the fact that he was getting hit on the head by Jamie with a pan when they were together. All of these details aided the defense in their theory of the case that this was abnormal for Shelby to have reacted in this way. Raul Bonasco, who is the Deputy Chief of Corrections, gave testimony. He testifies to what prison life is like if you're sentenced to life without parole and what is expected of the inmate. He says that the inmates do not get private TV or private rooms, and says that it's very similar to what you have in the army, and says that the inmates will have to work without pay. He testifies that Shelby was cooperative in county jail, followed the rules, was respectful, and was successful in pursuit of GEDs for paralegal, and he didn't get in trouble unlike the other inmates that he has seen in his experience. He testifies that Shelby wanted to mentor the other inmates, and says Shelby could be beneficial in their education department where he could tutor and educate other inmates. On cross-examination, the state highlights his wages for consultancy work and how he also gets paid in a public position paid work, and highlights that there are cases in which people get released or acquitted due to reversals and changes of the law. On redirect exam, the defense highlights that the defense has to seek approval for the state of Florida to have him as a witness and pay him, and he could have been hired by the state to educate the jury about death row. Defense also highlights that the law changes all the time, and there could even be a reversal to the death row penalty in the future. But the current law is he's going to prison forever. Now, this was a good witness, especially with showing that there was a change in behavior when he was in prison compared to when he was outside of prison and what he was doing. That there was a change in behavior, that it would have been abnormal based on the other testimonies that we heard, that it would have been abnormal for him to have done what he did that day and stay with the Ivansic for a week before traveling to Ohio, that it would have been even be abnormal to beat his wife with a hammer like that and continue all of that with the Ivansic. This does help that, and it also does help with the idea that people have of prisons. It removes that bias and shows that they are not in a summer camp, basically, that they're not going away on holiday, that they are actually there to work. Even though that was the case, I feel like this was still a bit stinging when it came out that there could be reversals to the law and Shelby could walk free. If someone was thinking to show mercy, they might have it in the back of their mind that, hey, even the defense attorney is not even contesting the fact that a law could change and Shelby could walk free one day. So if we want to show him mercy, he could be back on the streets. I felt like this was a 50-50 type of witness for the defense. My final thoughts for this verdict is it's not surprising at all that the jury reached their conclusion and it only took 4 hours. The reason why I felt like this is because they already had one aggravating factor. So if they decided we're not even going to care about the Ivansic, we do believe that there was something psychologically wrong with him, so we're not going to care about that. They might have just looked at the aggravating factor that he was already convicted in Ohio and say, yeah, let's actually convict him on that. So that's one thing. The other thing, even if they overlook that conviction and believe no one is deserving of a death penalty just because they have a conviction in another state, so we're not going to regard that. There is not a way that you're going to overlook the sheer amount of deaths, the volume of people dying in the state of Florida and believe, actually, let's just send him to prison alone. They might have just looked at that and decided, yeah, no, this guy definitely deserves prison simply because of the fact that 3 people had died and they were all killed in the space of 2 days. He had stayed at their home with kids and burned incense, poured paint on them, hid them in carpets, done all these things and tried to even bury them the same way that he buried his wife. So they may have looked at that and thought, you know what, let's just put him to death just for that. They may not have bought the fact that it was premeditated. They might have just decided, no, this was way too cruel and heinous. I personally thought it was just way too cruel. But I do believe there was one moment that just sunk the defense case and just made it a non-arguable issue, and that was the fact that Jamie was only 17 when she got with Shelby. And I don't think a lot of people are going to overlook that and think, let's show him mercy, because end of the day, when you are that young and suffering from illnesses, you're not going to act rationally. It was always going to be toxic. I do not think that Shelby used the abuse as a shield, in my opinion. I think that he was probably genuinely scared of what might happen to the children. I do believe he was genuinely scared for his life. That could be true. But end of the day, the fact that they got together when she was 17 really changed things, because the jury had no idea about this fact. It wasn't even brought up on the opening arguments. No one testified to her being only 17. I don't think they were even allowed to enter that. But because the door was opened by the defense through the psychologist, they could ask a question in regards to that home life that they were trying to present with Jamie. And I thought that this completely sunk the case for them. So even though I don't know who was the primary aggressor in the relationship between Jamie and Shelby, and we just had to conclude that it was bi-directional abuse, regardless, doesn't warrant anybody to be killed in the manner that she was killed. But I do really feel like the jury only decided this way because they felt that this was a completely heinous act on the Ivansic. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. If you've made it this far, you are a true catch-upper. Make sure that you hit that like button to help with the YouTube algorithm. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more videos. We also covered a case on the channel where a widow had killed her husband for the insurance money to run away with her boyfriend. Really interesting case. Go check out the full recap of the Karina Cooper trial. Without further, thank you so much again for watching. I go by the name of Hines, and this has been The Catch Up.